Mesothelioma of the eye, also known as ocular mesothelioma, is a rare form of cancer that affects the thin layer of protective tissue that covers many of the internal organs in the body, including the eyes. This thin protective layer is known as the mesothelium. Exposure to asbestos is the primary risk factor associated with developing mesothelioma. As such, preventing exposure to asbestos is currently considered the most effective way to help prevent the development of ocular mesothelioma. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral fiber that was once widely used in many construction materials for its fire-resistant and insulating properties. Common asbestos-containing materials that people may have been exposed to in the past include insulation materials, ceiling and floor tiles, asbestos cement products like piping and siding, brake pads, and many other products. Asbestos was banned for most uses in many countries starting in the 1970s and 1980s due to health concerns. However, asbestos is still present in many older buildings and structures constructed before the bans. Anyone who worked directly with asbestos products prior to bans, or who performed renovations or demolition of older buildings, faced significantly elevated risks. Family members of workers who carried asbestos dust home on their clothing also faced increased risks. When asbestos fibers are inhaled or otherwise introduced into the body, they can become trapped deep in the lungs and other tissues. Asbestos fibers are biologically very persistent, meaning they do not break down and clear from the body easily. Their sharp, thin structure also allows them to penetrate deep into tissues where they can cause damage. Over many years of accumulation, asbestos fibers have been shown to cause inflammation and genetic errors that can eventually lead to the uncontrolled cell growth characteristic of cancerous tumors. For mesothelioma in particular, the accumulation of asbestos fibers in the thin mesothelium membrane surrounding internal organs is thought to drive its development. The long latency period between exposure to asbestos and the onset of mesothelioma, which can be 20 to 50 years, allows for primary prevention efforts focusing on exposure reduction and elimination. Banning asbestos for most construction uses in the late 20th century has significantly reduced new exposures. However, exposure risks remain for those involved in the removal and remediation of existing asbestos-containing materials, and secondary exposures are still possible if these materials degrade or are disturbed without proper precautions. Ongoing public education efforts aim to inform tradespeople and homeowners of the risks and necessary safety protocols for working with asbestos. Regulations require the use of protective equipment like respirators, full-body protective clothing, and negative pressure containment when asbestos abatement projects are undertaken. Proper handling and disposal of asbestos-containing demolition debris and wastes can also help prevent exposures. Wastes must be kept thoroughly wet and securely contained to prevent the release of asbestos fibers into air where they could become suspended and inhaled by others. Asbestos debris and waste must be specially packaged and transported to approved landfills designed to safely contain these hazardous materials indefinitely. These regulatory controls are important not just to protect demolition and abatement workers directly handling asbestos materials, but also communities and the environment surrounding removal sites. Achieving extensive removal of existing asbestos stocks over time can help substantially reduce long-term secondary asbestos exposures from degrading materials in the environment. Some studies have also associated parental exposures to asbestos, especially those of women, with increased risks of mesothelioma and other cancers in their children later in life. This so-called third-hand exposure risk to family members highlights the importance of ensuring proper protective protocols are followed even for low-risk asbestos disturbance projects around the home, to prevent asbestos fibers from being transported out of work areas on clothing, tools or other items. With asbestos remaining present in many existing structures still in use today, continued public education efforts are important to raise awareness of this legacy exposure hazard and precautions required for any maintenance or renovation work that could potentially disturb asbestos materials. While no validated screening tests currently exist for early detection of ocular mesothelioma, regular eye exams by an optometrist or ophthalmologist are important for anyone who faced elevated asbestos exposures, either occupationally or residentially, to monitor for any signs and symptoms indicative of ocular mesothelioma or other asbestos-related conditions. Early detection improves treatment options and prognosis for mesothelioma when it does occur. However, the primary and most effective prevention strategy remains eliminating exposure to asbestos fibers before they can trigger malignant transformation within the mesothelium tissues and contribute to the development of cancer like ocular mesothelioma many decades later. Through a combination of past bans on its use, proper handling and disposal of existing asbestos stocks, and continued public education, the incidence of mesothelioma including its rare ocular forms stand to significantly decline in the future as legacy exposures are minimalized over time. Preventing exposure to asbestos fibers through past bans on its use in construction, strict handling and disposal regulations for existing materials, and ongoing public education represents the most promising avenue currently available for helping to prevent the development of ocular mesothelioma. While this rare cancer cannot be entirely eliminated due to historical exposures that remain clinically relevant decades later, concerted global efforts at eliminating and reducing all new sources of asbestos exposure hold the greatest potential for helping to prevent future cases from occurring. Maintaining vigilance over existing asbestos stocks and raising awareness of necessary safety protocols for any work that could disturb these legacy materials will also remain crucial primary prevention strategies for ocular mesothelioma and other asbestos-related diseases for many